Good morning. Good to have you with us on a Monday. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off today. We are going to start in Minnesota, where the suspect in what officials say were multiple targeted political shootings is now in custody. Police arrested Vance Bolter last night after an urgent two-day manhunt. The Ramsey County Sheriff's Office posted this photo on Facebook. It captures a moment just after Bolter's arrest, calling it the face of evil. Officials described it as the biggest and most intense manhunt in state history. Bolter is 57 years old, a husband and father. He now faces state and federal charges for his alleged role in the murders of State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, also for the attempted murders of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife. Investigators say they found a longer list of names in the suspect's vehicle, including several pro-choice lawmakers from a number of states, but they believe he acted alone. Now, investigators at all levels are trying to figure out why this happened. Former FBI Supervisor Rob D'Amico is here to talk about the investigation and the manhunt. We're going to start with NBC News correspondent Jay Gray, who is outside the state capitol in St. Paul. It's about 60 miles from where the suspect was finally captured. Jay, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Joe. I want to show you what's happening here at the Capitol. You can see a makeshift memorial just behind us that has been growing. And in fact, long before the sun came up, there were people here coming to pay their respects, standing and spending a few moments there. This, as we do learn more about that manhunt you talk about, a massive team of officers and federal agents stalking the suspect through the woods for hours, making their move just after nightfall. After more than 40 hours on the run, tactical teams close in, capturing Vance Bolter overnight.
There's no question that this is the largest manhunt in the state's history.
Federal, state, and local agencies searching for the man they say murdered State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, and in a separate attack, severely injuring State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette. Bullet holes from that shooting visible through their front door. The break in the case came Sunday afternoon. Officers locating an abandoned car Bolter is suspected of using after the attacks in a rural area about 50 miles southwest of Minneapolis and just minutes from his home. Then, after a tip from a resident, honing in, tracking, and surrounding Bolter.
The suspect crawled to law enforcement teams and was placed under arrest at that point in time. There was no use of force by any member of law enforcement.
Agents say Bolter was armed when he was taken into custody. A criminal complaint unsealed after his arrest shows police found at least 3 AK-47 rifles, a 9mm pistol, and a kill list in his car, a ballistic vest, mask, and police-style badge on the ground outside the vehicle. Evidence, and what police stress, is still an open and active investigation.
Now begins the hard work of looking at what the motive is, looking at putting this case together.
As the Twin Cities struggle with overwhelming loss. Yeah, and understandably, there is relief with the arrest that this suspect is no longer on the loose. But, Joe, there's also a real period of grieving here, and a lot of people still very upset about what's happened and what they've lost here. We should also say that things on the legal side moving rather quickly. We have learned this morning that he will make his first court appearance later this afternoon. He faces 2 charges of second-degree murder, 2 charges of attempted second-degree murder. We expect those to be bumped up to first degree. And there is also a discussion underway with federal prosecutors who say they may get involved, that he could face federal charges, including possibly terrorism.
All right, Jay Gray in St. Paul. Jay, thank you so much. I'm joined now by former FBI Supervisor Rob D'Amico. Rob, I know you were on the air and on MSNBC moments after we started learning about all of this over the weekend. So now that the suspect's in custody, just what are the top priorities for investigators? What do they want to know?
Well, just like a person, I think the whole investigation had an adrenaline dump last night. They were relieved that he was caught because that was a safety concern. But they're probably going on 48, I think it was caught at the 43-hour mark. They probably hadn't slept since, so they probably got a few hours last night and then going back at it today. All the tactical teams will go away. Now the primary thing is to start slowing down the investigation. Yesterday they were looking for clues to where he may be, and that was very, very, I don't want to say rushed, but they were looking through it hurriedly to find those little nuggets that they could get. Now it's going to be laying the case out. What timeline? They're going to go back several weeks, months to look at his timeline of his mental status and what he was doing and what he was looking at. They're also going to be looking for accomplices. Where was someone helping him? How did he get that second car? How did he get all the weapons? Everything that they're going to look at is, was he provided assistance in any way? Some of it may have been unknowing, but they're going to look at that and then see if there's charges there.
You mentioned the suspect taken into custody about 43 hours after the shootings happened, relatively close to his home after a tip. I should know his home a good distance away from where the shootings happened. When you look at everything we've learned about the suspect, the allegations against him, what kind of profile begins to emerge?
Well, I think it started like everyone says, oh, he's a nice guy. I never saw it happening. Obviously, he was hiding some of this. He may have the views that led him to this. Some people may have known. He may have been communicating online or through encrypted chats with other members of a group that felt the same way. Obviously, the people around him didn't see it. But once you start talking to all of them and you start looking at his electronics and figuring out who else he may have been communicating with that others didn't know, you started putting together, where did this slide go from beliefs to violent action to really having 3 AKs and an entire hit list that he thought he may go out and commit.
Even if it turns out he did act alone, you're always worried about the potential for copycat crimes. And just bottom line, we live in politically tense times, to put it mildly. What are the steps police and other authorities just everywhere should be considering to try and keep lawmakers safe in light of what happened over the weekend?
I think they're going to have to go out and as a law enforcement community, figure out how best to keep the state and local politicians and lawmakers safer, and tips on how to do things at your house and when you're getting in your car, because you do talk about copycats. It's almost like school shootings where you see one and then very shortly you see another one and maybe another one. And it's not like someone didn't have the idea. Someone else is thinking about the same thing this guy was thinking about. He sees this and he likes the results. Though I think it's great that he got caught quick, because that puts in their head that if you do this, you're not going to get away with it. But they may not like, the politicians doing this, and they may have been thinking about it, and they may want to take action based on this. So there's a real safety concern, and hopefully they see the country come together and say, absolutely not, from both sides. This is not tolerated, kind of like after 9/11 when we had that unity.
D'Amico, always good to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Millions of Americans took to the streets over the weekend to protest the actions of the Trump administration. Those marches were sparked in part by ICE raids against undocumented migrants in major cities. The protests were the largest we've seen since Mr. Trump returned to power in January. They happened on the president's birthday, the same day he held a military parade on the streets of Washington, D.C. That controversial event, estimated to cost as much as $45 million, was met with skepticism among many lawmakers, including Republican Senator Rand Paul. Here's his conversation with Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker.
Hello there, Joe and Savannah. This week on Meet the Press, I spoke to Republican Senator Rand Paul, who told me he wasn't fully on board with President Trump's military parade that took place in Washington this week. President Trump says the parade was to showcase the Army's military might, even to inspire a new generation to sign up for military service. Senator, what do you say about that argument? Could the parade have that benefit of encouraging people to sign up and enlist?
You know, I'm all for the president appearing and doing enlistment ceremonies at military bases. I've been with the president at Dover to receive home our dead soldiers, and so those who have been killed in action, and to mourn their loss. But I just never liked the idea of the parade, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and the only parades I can remember are Soviet parades for the most part, or North Korean parades. And the parades I remember from our history were different. You know, everybody remembers that famous scene of the soldier, you know, dipping the girl and kissing the girl in New York in a ticker tape parade. But we were rejoicing the end of war, and we were rejoicing our soldiers coming home. And that absolutely ought to be commemorated and discussed every year, Memorial Day, Veterans Day. But we never glorified weapons so much. And I know he means well. I don't think he means for any of this to be depicted in another fashion, but I'm just not a big fan. And then there is the cost. I mean, we're $2 trillion in the hole, and just an additional cost like this, I'm not for it.
You can see my full interview and a lot more at meetthepress.com. You can also get more Meet the Press right here on NBC News Now every weekday at 4 p.m.
All right, Kristen, thank you. Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. She's following the president's visit to Canada for the G7 meeting there. Yamiche, before we get to the G7, talk to us about the protests we saw over the weekend while this military parade was happening. Despite the demonstrations against his policies, it does now look like the president's doubling down on his deportation efforts in Democratic-run cities, and yet possibly pulling back on raids on hotels and farms. Talk about what we're learning here.
Well, good morning, Joe. It's really interesting. The president is doing two things. First, he is publicly saying that he wants to expand deportation efforts, and he's saying specifically he wants to target Democratic-run cities, including Los Angeles and New York. He said he wants to focus on sanctuary cities, which are cities that say that they want to try to protect undocumented immigrants. That being said, over the weekend, I was in touch with some Department of Homeland Security officials who were not pushing back on reporting that showed that the president was actually telling ICE officials not to go into hotels and not to focus on farms, and instead to pivot to focusing really on criminals and people who have broken the law. And part of that is because there's reporting that the agricultural secretary actually was lobbying President Trump, saying, look, there are people, farmers, Trump supporters, who are saying that this is really hurting their business, hurting the U.S. economy possibly, and that as a result, those sorts of raids that are focusing on agricultural workers and hotel workers, those need to be pulled back a bit. So the president in some ways is acquiescing to that, but publicly he wants to still be seen as someone who is carrying out the biggest mass deportation effort, and as a result, you're hearing him talk about Democrat-run cities. But I think it's going to be very interesting in the next few days and weeks to see who actually gets pulled in by ICE now, because there is this pivot where we're expecting to not go to farms and to restaurants.
Yeah, especially if the goal is still to try and do 3,000 a day. All right, Yamiche, let's turn to the G7. I know Israel's war with Iran is expected to dominate the agenda there, but we're going to get to that later in our hour. I want to ask you about another major area. That's the economy. How much of a shadow do you expect the president's trade tariffs will cast on these meetings?
Well, the president's stick more than carrots trade policy is definitely going to be something that's going to be a big topic here. Of course, the G7 is really a meeting of the world's biggest economies. You have Italy, Germany, Japan. So you have countries that want to make deals with the United States. And of course, you have Canada hosting. So there is going to be a lot of talk, yes, about what's going on in the Middle East, and also, frankly, about what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. Actually, Prime Minister Mark Carney, while he was inviting, of course, the members of the G7, he also invited some non-members, and Ukraine is one of them. So we expect to have conversations about war, but there's going to be a lot of conversations about actually trying to eke out some trade deals. The President Trump is under a lot of pressure to actually roll out some trade deals. The president said he's going to be making a number of trade deals, but we actually haven't seen any. Even when it comes to the UK, he had a framework of a deal, but we actually haven't seen details of that deal. So he's hoping to walk away with some trade deals. We're not sure if that's going to actually happen, though. Joe?
And Yamiche, this is also the president's first visit to Canada since he repeated those claims of trying to make that country the 51st state. We have seen strained relations between these two countries since then. Could things get tense at all when the president meets the Canadian Prime Minister later today?
It's a really interesting question. We know that Prime Minister Mark Carney was actually elected, and part of the election there and part of the conversation was the fact that he was pushing back on President Trump and saying Canada wasn't for sale, that it didn't want to be the 51st state. Of course, those conversations and the president saying that he wants to make Canada the 51st state has angered a lot of Canadians. We've also seen even American liquor being pulled off shelves here in Canada. That being said, I think the Prime Minister of Canada wants to have a sort of smooth G7. We've seen other G7s in the past where there was one with a famous picture where you saw the leader of Germany actually leaning over President Trump. It was sort of encapsulating the tensions there. This G7, he's really, I think, trying to have a smooth one. So we'll see how those conversations go. But I expect that Canada, at the end of this, will not be the 51st state, Joe.
I think that's a safe bet right there. All right, Yamiche, thank you so much. This morning, exclusive new polling from NBC News dives into the Trump administration's Make America Healthy Again agenda, which is skeptical of big pharma and big food. Its work has been a priority for Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The poll was conducted with data collection from SurveyMonkey. The poll found the public is closely divided over its view of Kennedy. A slim 51% said they had a favorable opinion of him, 48% unfavorable. For more on this, we're joined now by NBC News medical reporter Erica Edwards. Erica, good to have you with us. So let's start right there on the poll about how Americans feel just about Kennedy. What else did we learn?
Hey, Joe, good morning. Well, this was a big survey. Nearly 20,000 people polled between May and early June. Now, I will say that this was before Secretary Kennedy dismantled the CDC's vaccine panel. But what we found was that just over a third, 36% there, found him somewhat favorable, mostly conservative voters. But when we dug a little bit deeper, his popularity is strongest among people who follow President Trump's Make America Great Again platform. The majority of people who align simply with the Republican Party in general were somewhat less favorable. Joe?
So, Erica, the poll also asked what deserves the most blame for chronic health issues in America, like obesity and heart disease. What did we see there?
Americans overwhelmingly pointed to the food industry, especially ultra-processed foods, for the rise in chronic illnesses. And this was across party lines. Republicans, Democrats, independents all blamed the food industry for the rise in chronic illnesses. Now, I spoke with a wide variety of people from Florida to Wisconsin and California. They all said that we need to change our diet and start making some lifestyle changes. Here's what they had to say.
We design our cities to not be walkable. We make our restaurants to where they're not healthy. We exacerbate the issue all on our own.
I think the way food is processed these days, it's ultra processed, is a big contributor, along with people being on their phones, not really staying active, just sitting around a lot, and exercise has kind of gone by the wayside.
Now, Kennedy has also blamed environmental toxins for the rise in chronic illnesses. Just 6% of our surveyed folks agreed with that.
Erica, a major aspect of Mr. Kennedy's tenure has been his stance on vaccines. He has long spread misinformation about the safety and effectiveness of childhood vaccines. What do Americans think about his views?
This is squarely where the majority of Americans absolutely disagree with Secretary Kennedy. 49% strongly support the use of vaccines. Another 31% somewhat support. And once again, this was across party lines. Everyone I talked with, conservative, liberal, all said routine childhood vaccines like the MMR vaccine are safe and important for public health. Joe?
Not every issue totally partisan. Erica, good to have you with us. Thank you. In West Virginia, at least 5 people are dead. Several more are missing after strong storms triggered major flash flooding. As much as 4 inches of rain fell in just half an hour on Saturday night. That caused rivers in the northern part of the state to overtop their banks. Rushing water washed cars into creeks and damaged homes and businesses. West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey has declared a state of emergency in 2 counties there, with more rain in the forecast every day through Thursday. Speaking of the forecast, we've got more now on the expanding risk of severe storms with your Morning News Now weather. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Yeah, and it's not just rainfall. We're going to see the threat for heavy rainfall and more threat for flash flooding. So this is what it looks like this morning. We're watching 2 systems that are bringing some showers and storms. A cluster in the northern plains. That's going to be the bullseye for some storms today. The northern fringe of the central plains into the northern plains. And then we're looking at a big half of the country, eastern half of the country, looking at the chance for showers, some spotty thunderstorms, and the chance for more flash flooding, especially in the mid-Atlantic, the Carolinas. And this is what it looks like. We have several days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, where we're looking at showers and storms, and some of these will reach severe limits. So for today, we're looking at those spotty showers in the southeast, and we say spotty showers, but we could see some flooding potentials with any of these storms and flash flooding also. And then we have another system that's moving through the northern plains. You notice these dark colors. This is a future cast. So we're anticipating some heavy rainfall with any of these storms. Also some hail, some lightning, some thunder, some damaging winds, and the chance of some tornadoes. Tomorrow, watch this cold front move a little bit further to the east. So now we're looking at possible storms across the central plains. And notice that second line there. Flash flooding does continue, or at least the threat does. So we're going to watch that tomorrow. tomorrow, too, into Wednesday and also Thursday. Wednesday, there's that cold front as it advances into the Great Lakes. We're looking at that storm risk from Missouri to Michigan. And again, could see everything on the table in terms of some damaging winds, heavy rainfall, some hail, and even the chance of a few tornadoes. So this is what it looks like for today. 9 million people at risk for destructively large hail. We could see golf ball size hail, strong winds gusting over 65 miles per hour. That's nearly hurricane force winds. And that could cause damage all on its own, a few tornadoes. And we're looking at enhanced risk. That's 3 out of 5 on the severity scale, where you see the orange on the map here. So places like Minnesota all the way to Nebraska could see some really strong storms. That is today. Tomorrow, we're looking at 77 million people. And I do want to end on Wednesday, because look how this number grows to 41 million people at risk throughout the Great Lakes into the southern plains. And again, we're looking at all the risks for severe weather on Thursday.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.